In a crumbling village hemmed by thorns and fog, where roofs sagged with rot and wells ran dry in summer, there lived a boy whose name few remembered. They called him the Orphan, though his real name was Eli. No one knew exactly when he had arrived. Some said he wandered in from the forest one frostbitten morning. Others claimed he had always been there, like the cracked stones and broken fences that marked the village's edge. Eli slept in the remains of a burnt chapel that sat crooked at the northern ridge, where winds howled like mourning spirits. Its roof was long gone, the rafters scorched black from a fire that, decades ago, had licked it hollow. What remained was a half-buried bell tower and pews turned to ash. Most villagers avoided the place. They said it was cursed, but Eli called it home. Every morning before the sun had a chance to melt the dew, Eli would kneel beside the old altar stone. He pressed his small hands together, his fingers stiff from cold. He didn't speak loudly when he prayed. He whispered like he was afraid to wake something that still slumbered beneath the ruin. His voice echoed faintly against the stone, weaving with the wind. To the villagers, this was madness. What god would listen to a nameless boy in a dead place? "What are you muttering for, boy?" Old Tomas the blacksmith once sneered. Even the rats fled that church after the fire, but Eli didn't respond. He simply bowed lower. The flame of his faith flickered quietly, unseen. By day, he gathered scraps, rotten apples, moldy bread, bones stripped bare by dogs. He gave half to a ragged woman who limped from house to house begging for crusts. She never asked where he lived, and he never told her. But sometimes she would smile and touch her heart, and Eli would smile back. It was the only kindness he knew. At night, when wind screamed through the trees and the village hearts were warm with drunken laughter, Eli would curl up under the collapsed beams of the chapel. He had found a wool cloak buried in the rubble once. Though moth-eaten and damp, it shielded him enough to dream. And when he dreamed, he always saw light, not fire, but something softer, brighter. He saw hands reaching down. He heard bells. Once, he asked a traveling friar who passed through the village for an old Bible page. The friar, confused, handed him a torn corner from Psalms. It was the only written word Eli owned. He folded it like treasure and pressed it beneath a stone near the altar. That page, to him, was sacred. Children from the village, led by the mayor's spoiled son Dallin, would sometimes follow Eli and mock him from the bushes. They threw stones when he knelt. One day, they drew crude symbols on the chapel's walls and danced like devils, laughing. Eli didn't flinch. He simply sang a hymn beneath his breath until they grew bored and wandered away. He was used to being alone. But that winter, something began to change. The wind turned colder. The trees near the chapel bent as if listening. Birds stopped nesting in the steeple's cracked frame. And then, one evening, just as the sun dipped and the chapel lay bathed in rust-colored dusk, Eli heard something no one had heard in years: the bell. Faint at first, like a memory struggling to reach the present, but real. He stood up, frozen, eyes wide. His bare feet stung against the stone, but he didn't move. The sound rose once more, deeper now, resonating like thunder tucked in velvet. It was coming from the broken bell tower, where rusted iron had long ceased to move. No one else heard it, only Eli. He didn't speak of it the next day. Who would believe him? But he returned at sunset, knelt once more, and whispered his prayer. This time, it wasn't only for food or shelter. He asked for a sign that his voice, however small, however trembling, might still reach heaven. The chapel stayed silent. The wind returned. The sky turned black. But before he laid down to sleep, he noticed something strange in the ash near the altar. A footprint, fresh, too large to be his, and too deep for someone to have stepped lightly. Someone had stood beside him during his prayer. Someone who hadn't left a trail coming in or out. And in that moment, Eli, for the first time in his life, felt something stir in the bones of the old church. Not the memory of fire, but something older, something alive. He whispered again, not out of fear, but with a trembling hope, "Are you here?" The wind replied, not with howls, but with a sudden warmth, a breeze that smelled like frankincense and firewood. He fell asleep smiling. Tomorrow, he would return, because now, the ruins had begun to whisper back. The next morning, Eli awoke to frost on his lashes and the distant bray of oxen. He shook the stiffness from his limbs and sat upright, glancing first at the altar stone. The footprint was gone, only ash remained. Maybe it had been a dream, or maybe not. Either way, his hunger now gnawed louder than mystery. The village square was already stirring. Merchants unfolded worn cloths to display wilted vegetables and chipped tools. Smoke curled from crooked chimneys, but no one spared Eli a glance as he tiptoed barefoot across the muddy cobbles. eyes locked on a crust of bread left near the edge of a stall. He waited, counted the vendor's turns. Then he reached out fast, careful. "Thief!" The shout cracked the morning stillness. A hand caught his wrist. Rough, unforgiving. It was Mara, the spice seller's daughter, sharp-tongued and cruel. She dragged Eli forward as villagers gathered to see what the orphan had done this time. "He stole it," she said, holding up the bread. "Like always." The crowd grumbled. Tomas the blacksmith crossed his arms. "Should have let the fire take that chapel and the brat." Someone muttered, "No mother, no morals." But just before the punishment came, before someone raised a stick or tossed a stone, an old voice broke through the circle. "Let him go." It was the ragged woman, the beggar Eli always shared food with. She stepped between the boy and the crowd, her gait limping, eyes fogged but fearless. "I'll pay for it," she said, lifting two copper coins with shaking hands. "Bread for a prayer, that's the price." Mara scoffed. "Why would you waste it on him?" But the woman didn't answer. She pressed the bread into Eli's hand and led him away with a gentle nudge. No one followed. He was too worthless. She was too strange. They sat together under the broken arch of a collapsed stable. The woman tore the bread in half and gave him the larger piece. "You prayed again, didn't you?" she asked, as if she already knew. Eli nodded. She smiled. "Then eat. You'll need strength for when he answers." After she left, Eli didn't return to the chapel right away. He wandered the fields beyond the village, following the wind. In his pocket, he kept the bread's last crumb. Not for eating, for offering. Near the tree line, he found a smooth patch of earth and knelt down. The sky above was a dull gray, heavy with unshed rain. He placed the crumb on a flat stone and whispered, "For you, not for me." Then he closed his eyes and prayed, not with words, but with silence. The kind of silence that listens. Laughter broke it. When he turned, Dallin and his gang stood behind him. "Is that what passes for worship now?" Dallin sneered, pointing at the crumb. "Maybe next you'll pray to moldy cheese." Eli stood up slowly. They circled him. One boy kicked over the stone. Another yanked the cloak from his shoulders and threw it into a puddle. "Go on then." Dallin grinned, mocking. "Show us your miracle." Eli looked at each face in turn. Their eyes were full of ridicule but also fear, because deep down, something in them suspected that he might just say something and be heard. He said nothing, and that silence burned more than any insult. One boy shoved him to the ground. Another spat. The crumb was crushed beneath a boot. Dallin raised a hand to strike, but then stopped. A wind had swept through the trees behind them. Sudden, cold, but it carried no leaves. Instead, it carried a scent, frankincense, and firewood. The boys froze. "What is that?" one whispered. Dallin dropped his hand. "Nothing, just smoke from the village," but his voice shook. They ran, pushing each other as they fled. Eli remained on the ground, bruised and dirty, but a smile slowly spread across his face. He looked up to the heavens, where the clouds had begun to thin. A single beam of golden light slipped through, falling quietly upon the flat stone where the crumb had been. The birds sang again, and far off, beyond the hills, the bell rang once more. The village schoolhouse stood on the eastern rise, just beyond the old olive grove. Its roof sagged, its windows cracked, and yet every morning, children filed in with rough parchment and sharper tongues. Eli was not one of them. He stood near the fence that morning, outside the circle of learning, a silent observer, barefoot in the dew. He had no slate to write on, no father to scold him for wrong answers, but he came anyway, watching, listening, waiting for a kindness that never arrived. Inside, the lesson was dull, but when Dallin saw Eli through the open shutter, his boredom turned to mischief. "Looks like the church rat's back," Dallin muttered. The others chuckled. Dallin was the mayor's only son, bold, proud, and cruel. He ruled the schoolyard like his father ruled the village, with a sharp word and a ready fist. When the lesson ended, he didn't go home. He went looking. Eli was at the chapel ruins again, drawing in the dust. He didn't hear the boys approach. "Still talking to your invisible friend?" Dallin jeered. Eli didn't answer. He drew a small cross with a stick, simple, uneven, but made with care. Dallin stepped on it. Then he laughed. "Here's a better one," he said, grabbing the stick and drawing a crooked face beside it, mocking Eli's quiet faith. The other boys howled. One of them yanked the small book from Eli's satchel. The Psalter, old, ragged, held together by cloth and hope. Eli lunged for it, but Dallin was faster. "Let's see what nonsense you whisper when no one's listening." He opened it and tore a page. Eli gasped. "No," he cried, reaching for it. But Dallin threw the page into the wind. Then another, laughing louder each time. The pages fluttered like frightened doves up before falling into the mud. That's when Eli snapped. He didn't strike. He didn't scream. He knelt right there in the dust, bruised and breathing hard, and began to pray softly. One boy hesitated. Another backed away, but not Dallin. He picked up the last page and held it over a torch stub. If your God loves you so much he can stop this. Flame licked the edge of the parchment, and then crack. A sudden roar echoed above them, a violent shatter of air and stone. From the broken chapel bell tower, a jagged piece of masonry tumbled down, not toward Eli, but toward the boys. They scattered, screaming. The fire dropped. The page fell to the ground, scorched but not consumed. Silence returned, broken only by Eli's whisper, "Forgive them. They do not know what they do." Later that night, Dallin lay restless in his bed. He said nothing at supper, not even when his father boasted about grain taxes or scolded a worker for lateness. He just stared out the window, toward the chapel ruins, and somewhere in his chest, a seed of fear had been planted. Not fear of Eli, but of what might be listening. It was just before dawn when the sound came, deep, hollow, impossible. Bon! Eli stirred from the wooden bench where he slept. The sky was still ink dark. Birds had not yet begun their morning songs. But the air was restless. Something had shifted. Bon! Again! The sound rolled through the village like thunder clothed in memory, not one of the new metal bells from the eastern townships. This sound was older, lower, familiar, yet long forgotten. At the mayor's house, Dallin sat up in his bed, eyes wide. His father, already dressed in his thick ceremonial robes, stormed out into the courtyard, face tight. "That bell's been broken for 20 years, he growled. By the third ring, the entire village had woken. Windows opened, lanterns were lit, and feet began to shuffle toward the ruins of the chapel. No one spoke aloud what they all wondered, who was ringing the bell. At the chapel hill, the villagers gathered like sheep without a shepherd. They kept their distance from the crumbling bell tower, unsure whether to expect a miracle or a collapse. Eli stood alone beneath the arch. He looked up. The tower was still silent now, but at the top, the heavy rusted bell swayed slightly, as if someone had just let go. A few dared to come closer. They saw Eli, and nothing else. "It's a trick," someone murmured. "No rope could hold that bell," another whispered. Then old Miriam stepped forward. She had not walked without her cane in 10 years, but that morning she came unaided, drawn by something unseen. She touched Eli's shoulder. "What did you do, child?" "I prayed," Eli said. "That's all." Eli nodded and listened. The mayor pushed through the crowd, face flushed with anger and fear. His guards followed, spears ready, though they didn't know why. "This is blasphemy," the mayor barked. "No one touches the tower without my decree." No one did. Miriam answered calmly. "It's wind," someone suggested. "A storm, maybe," but the sky was still. No wind, no storm. Just that bell, swaying once more. Dallin stood near the back of the crowd, face pale. He hadn't told anyone what happened the day before. Not the book, not the stone, not the voice in his dreams. That voice, it had whispered only one thing: he is watching. Now he couldn't look at Eli, couldn't meet his eyes. Instead, he stared at the tower, the bell, and wondered who had pulled the rope that no longer existed. That night, the village couldn't sleep. Some said angels had come, some said demons. Others claimed it was the spirit of the old priest who died when the chapel burned. But Eli said nothing. He returned to the ruins alone, gathered the burnt pages from his psalter, and placed them inside a small wooden box he carved himself. He sat in silence, and waited. For what, even he did not know. But the bell had spoken, and it had spoken for him. At dawn, the fog clung low over the village, curling between doorframes and drifting like memory. The villagers stirred early, not from duty or trade, but from dread. The bell had rung, but no one claimed it. Eli's silence was unsettling, and now, the air itself seemed to wait. That's when they saw him, a silhouette descending the old northern ridge. Tall, cloaked, barefoot. His steps were slow, deliberate, like someone who remembered the ground beneath him. In one hand, he carried a lamp, but it held no flame. The light came from within, a pale, pulsing glow like heat buried beneath the coals. And when the figure looked up, the children hiding behind fences gasped. His eyes burned, not in pain, but in purpose, as if fire itself had been shaped into vision. Eli saw him from the chapel steps and stood without fear. The stranger approached, the lamp never flickering. He did not speak, but when he reached Eli, he knelt not in worship, but in recognition, as if this was a meeting long foretold. Word spread like wildfire. The mayor rushed out, demanding answers, flanked by guards and his trembling son Dallin. "Who are you?" the mayor barked. "What madness do you bring here?" The stranger rose. "I bring what you buried. Speak clearly, or be gone." But the man did not answer the mayor. Instead, he turned to Eli. "Do you remember the third psalm?" Eli blinked, then nodded. He whispered, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." The man smiled. "You remember more than the words." That day, no one knew what to do. The stranger would not enter homes. He asked for no food. He merely walked through the village, stopping at places long forgotten: a dried well, a collapsed granary, an empty cradle. Everywhere he went, light followed. His lamp glowed brighter near the sick, and when he stood beside old Miriam's dying son, the boy stirred for the first time in days. She wept, but the stranger never spoke a prayer aloud. He only looked, and the fire in his eyes did the rest. But not all welcomed him. The mayor called a secret council that night. "This is sorcery," he hissed. "We must cast him out before dawn." "But he hasn't harmed anyone," Dallin said quietly. The mayor turned to him. "Faith is harmless, but fire burns." That night, Eli dreamed. He saw a great tree ablaze, but the fire did not consume it. It illuminated faces long forgotten, voices long silenced, and he saw the stranger standing beneath it, lamp held high. He whispered something Eli could not hear, and then he vanished. Eli woke to smoke, not from fire but from torches. Villagers gathered at the chapel hill once more, but this time in fear, not wonder. The stranger stood in the center. The mayor, robes flowing, pointed his staff. "Leave, or we will make you leave." The stranger turned to him. "I was not sent to stay." Then he turned to Eli. But he was. In a final act, the stranger placed the glowing lamp into Eli's hands. It felt light but endless. The glow intensified. A hush fell, and as the stranger walked back toward the ridge, fire lit the horizon not from destruction, but from morning light. No one followed him. By the time the sun rose, he had vanished beyond the mist, but the hills still glowed, and Eli now carried the fire in his eyes. The old chapel, once blackened and abandoned, had changed. Not rebuilt, not restored, but reclaimed. Its stones, still scorched from the fire to decades ago, now seemed alive in the mornings. They held warmth, though no sun touched them. Moss withdrew from their cracks, and birds returned to roost in its hollow bell tower. And at the center, under the broken arch, stood Eli holding the stranger's lamp, still glowing, still burning from within. He came each day before dawn, knelt on the ashes, and prayed, and the villagers watched. They no longer mocked him, but they didn't draw near either. Faith, after all, was now visible, and visibility was dangerous. Dallin often stood behind the outer wall, watching from a distance. He remembered the fire in the man's eyes. He remembered how it mirrored Eli's now. He couldn't speak of it, not even to himself, but something inside him ached. For what? He didn't know. Then, on the seventh day after the stranger's departure, Eli dug. It wasn't planned. His hands simply moved. He knelt at the old altar stone and began to scoop the soot and earth with his fingers. Villagers whispered from afar, "He's gone mad again. What's he looking for?" Nothing's left there, just ashes. But Eli kept digging until his hand struck wood. Not rotted, not burned, preserved. He brushed away the dirt and revealed a trapdoor, one none of the builders remembered laying. He looked up once, silently, then opened it. Below, a narrow staircase descended into the earth. No one followed, but Eli did, and in the silence beneath the ruins, he found rooms for them, carved into stone, untouched by fire or time. Each room held something different: a robe, wide and folded, still smelling faintly of oil and frankincense. A basin, filled with water that shimmered in the dark, though there was no light. A book, written in a language he didn't understand, but one his heart seemed to remember. And a flame hovering, not on any candle or torch, but burning alone in the air like a breath held forever. He knelt before the flame, and it moved. It didn't consume, it didn't flicker, it danced, as if it recognized him. Eli placed the stranger's lamp beside it, and the two lights merged without sound. The lamp now burned twice as bright, but Eli wept, not in fear, not in joy, but in awe, because he knew this was not the first time fire had descended upon a child. When he returned above, his face glowed. He said nothing, but the villagers, though still watching, fell silent. Because now, when Eli stepped forward, the ashes beneath his feet left no prints. That night, Miriam told her granddaughter, years ago, when the old priest died in the fire, he whispered something. What was it? The girl asked. Miriam's voice trembled. There is still one who will carry the altar in his bones. One not born from blood, but from ash. And so they watched and waited, not for another stranger, but for what Eli would become. There was a hill to the east of the village, where no one dared step after dusk. The ground there was rocky, split by time and rumor. They said it was where the first temple once stood, long before stone chapels and painted crosses, long before the book had pages. Only whispers remained of that place, whispers and the bones beneath it. But now Eli walked there, alone, with the lamp in hand. The flame inside no longer flickered, it pulsed with a rhythm, not of breath, not of heartbeat, but of memory, as if the earth itself remembered something through its glow. At the top of the hill, where thorn bushes had grown wild, Eli stopped. He placed the lamp on the ground. Then he knelt, as he always did. But this time, he spoke no prayer. He listened. The silence was thick at first, but then, a sound, stone shifting beneath stone. Eli turned, but there was no wind, no birds, just the rocks, moving. One by one, small stones began to roll downhill, as if something beneath stirred. Then, a crack. A fissure split the earth just a few steps away, revealing not darkness but light, pale, gentle, familiar, and from it rose a figure. No flesh, no form, just the outline of a man built from the same dust that birthed Eden, crowned not in gold, but in silence. And when he spoke, it echoed in Eli's bones. You were called before you were born. Eli bowed his head. The figure continued, you walk in the path of one who burned, not in punishment but in promise. Who are you? Eli whispered. But the figure didn't answer. Instead, it turned its head eastward. And suddenly, the hill was filled with others. Figures emerging from the cracks. Some young, some old. All made of dust and shimmer and something deeper than words. They did not speak. They remembered. And in remembering, they bowed to Eli. Back in the village, a chill passed through Dallin as he stood beside his father. Something had changed again. He looked to the eastern ridge and saw light blooming from the hilltop, not fire, not dawn, but reverence. Should we go? Dallin asked. The mayor didn't answer. He only tightened his cloak, because he, too, had heard the old saying, when the forgotten kneel, the world must choose to remember, or to be left behind. As the night passed, Eli stood among the dead, not in fear, but in fellowship. They began to whisper his name, not as men speak, but as spirit sings, a sound like wind woven with fire. And with every breath, Eli felt their memory anchor into his flesh. He now carried not just the flame, not just the lamp, but the stories of those who waited for his coming. And when morning came, only footprints remained on the hill. One set, burned lightly into the stone, leading back toward the village, with new fire in the sky. The sky was clear when Eli returned, but something moved in it. Not clouds, not birds, but a tremble, a soft, soundless vibration that danced along the sunlight like a breath held too long. He walked through the village gate, barefoot, with ash still clinging to his robe. In his hand the lamp. Its light now flickered not as fire, but as language. And the moment his foot touched the central square, every bell in the village rang at once, though no one had touched them. People ran from homes and market stalls. Some clutched tools, others their children. And in the center stood a boy no longer small in presence, though still young in face. Eli looked around them, but not at them. He looked through, as if he saw something standing just behind every person. A shadow, a light, no one could tell. Then he raised the lamp, and thunder rolled, not from the mountains, but from him. His voice came like no voice should, not loud, not screaming, yet it shattered silence, fear, and stone. You have built walls with your doubt. You have crowned mockery as wisdom. You buried the altar and laughed at the wind. The cobblestones trembled beneath his feet. An old woman fell to her knees, weeping. A child clutched her mother and whispered, "But he's just a boy." But the thunder in Eli's words rolled on, "Yet he still walks among you, in the dust, in the flame, in the faith of the small, and he will ask you, why did you laugh?" Then lightning struck, but not the ground, not the sky, the bell tower. It didn't explode. It opened its roof, splitting like petals, revealing an iron cross long thought melted in the old fire. Unbroken, untouched, still shining. The villagers stared upward, but Eli simply lowered the lamp, and silence returned. The mayor stepped forward, lips trembling. What should we do?" Eli looked at him, not with anger, but with sadness. "You already did it." Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the chapel ruins once more. Some followed, some fled, but all heard the thunder that had come from a child's mouth, and none could forget it. Back on the hill where the dead had knelt, the dust whispered a name, not Eli, but the name before names, the one spoken only in heaven and now carried in a boy's breath. At dawn, the elders met, not in the open, but deep beneath the city in the old catacombs once used to hide from invading armies. The flicker of torches revealed eyes heavy with fear, not faith. Wrinkled hands clenched scrolls, and whispers danced across the damp stone walls like rats. He's just a child who commands lightning, or worse, a child who was sent. They did not say the word, not out loud, but every man there knew it. Messiah. Outside, the village was changing. People swept ash from the chapel steps. Children began tracing symbols in the dirt again. A widow lit a candle and left it where the altar once stood, as if someone still prayed there at night. Eli said nothing. He sat beneath the broken arch of the chapel, watching the lamp's soft flicker. He ate only bread. He spoke to no one, but they still came, one by one, not to speak but to listen. And sometimes, in the stillness, his lips would move soft, unheard, and those nearest swore they felt he, like a hearth warming a frozen room. But silence frightened the council more than thunder, so they sent the scribes. They came with scrolls and questions. Who taught you? What is this fire? Where is your father? To all, Eli replied, he who sent me walks ahead of me still. They sent the guards. He did not run. They searched his robes, found no weapon, only a fragment of parchment, a child's drawing of a tree and a flame. They crumpled it, but as they turned, the wind scattered the pieces like seeds into the dust. That night, the decree was carved into stone and nailed above the village gate. No child may speak the word, no light may be shown without permit. The orphan is not to be heard, and thus they tried to crown him with silence. But silence is only dangerous when it grows. And what grew now was not fear, it was curiosity, hunger, and fire. Because on the far edge of the field, near the shepherd's well, the earth cracked, and from it rose the first green shoot the village had seen in 3 winters. No one planted it, but it grew anyway, and at its base, someone had scratched into the stone. He is not done speaking. The morning began like no other. No bells rang, no orders were barked, no footsteps of guards stomped through the square. Instead there was music, low at first, like the hum of bees in spring, then rising layered voices, old and young, humming the same forgotten tune. A song with no name, but every heart knew it. And at the center of the square, where once lay only scorched stone, now stood the tree, not planted, but risen. Its bark shimmered faintly like cooled metal. Its leaves glowed not green, but amber, swaying even in still air. And beneath it sat Eli, cross-legged, still as stone. The orphan was not speaking, but the fire was. Small flames sat on people's shoulders, men, women, children alike. They did not burn, they did not consume, they simply rested. And in their presence, tongues were loosed, eyes were lifted, hearts long hardened by drought and grief began to whisper again. I remember now, I dreamed of this once. So, he really never left? The council came running, but the guards dropped their spears. The scribes tore their own scrolls. One even wept, whispering, I copied lies. And when the high priest raised his hand to curse the boy, it trembled, because behind Eli, the flame formed a shape, a man, radiant, unmistakable, and every elder fell to their knees. The stranger who brought fire at dawn now stood fully revealed, not cloaked, not veiled, but present, and all saw, and all knew. There were no speeches, no thunder, just one act. He knelt before the child, and placed his hand over Eli's heart. And then he spoke not with voice, but with fire. Let them be taught not by scrolls, but by spirit. Let them speak not with fear, but with truth. And let them walk not behind me, but with me. The tree's roots broke the stone, and living water poured out. People washed in it, laughed in it, danced in it. And the city that once banned the word became a city that was the word. And as night came, Eli rose. He walked alone to the hilltop and looked back one last time. In his hand was the old drawing, the tree, the flame, the stranger, now whole, now real. He whispered, they laughed at my faith. And from behind him, a voice said, but they don't laugh anymore.